I don't know if you remember the Key and Peele sketch from a few years ago
Hmm.
when they are black Republicans and they're having their little
I
convention.
didn't. I need to watch that.
They're having their little convention and they're all saying the same thing and there's somebody who comes into the room where they're talking and he says somebody's white wife is here and all of them leave because
This video is brought to you by Tatum Plus, brought to you by Tatum Plus, ladies and gentlemen, my brand new platform. We want to show some of what we do right here on YouTube. So check it out. If you like it, join Tatum Plus. You can see all of our other episodes. I think we got like 10 episodes out right now, and we talk about everything. So the link is in the description section. Tatum Plus is only $5.99. If you get it for the whole year, it's less than $5.99 a month. That's less than $1 a day. I mean, it ain't even close to that. That's less than 50 cents a day. Anyway, roll the film. It's funny to me, man, because like when you think about Booker T and you think about people like Thomas Sowell, I don't understand why we don't prioritize men like that or uplift men like that, because Thomas Sowell will never have a statue ever. So this is what kills me and what makes me feel skeptical, because they have been hell-bent on limiting and suppressing the voices of people that don't toe the line. So when I see how they've elevated Martin Luther King, almost every street in every city in America where all the crime happened for some reason is Martin Luther King Boulevard.
right.
But they make it a point that when Ben Carson decides that he's going to be a Republican, that they want to take his name off of school.
Right.
Thomas Sowell is the Antichrist. It makes me wonder that if they are willing to lift you up, you're probably on their side.
Right.
You're probably on the side of the leftists. You're probably on the side of what they want to glorify in this country.
Right.
That's the thing here's another thing that I thought about too, that when it comes to Martin Luther King and stuff, why I've been like totally rethinking this. I heard that Rosa Parks' husband, I said this at an event and people looked at me like I had three heads. Rosa Parks' husband had a vehicle.
Right.
Why is she, black people had their own bus system or company around that time when she sat on the bus. We had our own schools. We had, before that in the 30s and, the 20s and 30s, we had Black Wall Street, Harlem. Black people were innovative, Madam C.J. Walker, and that was a little bit before that.
Right.
But she was still one of the richest women to ever live. She was the first female millionaire.
Right. Yeah.
We had George Washington Carver, early 1900s, who was one of the greatest inventors of all time. How in the world did we get from all of that success and we having our own stuff to now staging instances of unrest? It reminds me of Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
And that's where I started being like, well, wait a minute.
Right.
20 years from now, they're going to say Black Lives Matter was an activist group that really helped curb the violence in the inner city against black people getting shot for no reason by cops.
Yeah. You're absolutely right about that. And the reason why 20 years from now that will be the rhetoric is because these ideologues are the ones who are in control of curriculum in America, and so they control who the winners and the losers are of history. And you said so much, and there's a lot that I want to respond to, but you're absolutely right. When you look at black success and how blacks are trending from the end of slavery till the 1960s, in the way of entrepreneurship, in the way of family formation, in the way of education and literacy. And Thomas Sowell makes this point all the time about literacy. When you look at this kind of upward trajectory, even in the face of Jim Crow, it's interesting that one of the arguments for integration or integrated schools is that, white kids, they're getting the state-of-the-art schools and they're getting the good books and this, that, and the other, and they make it look like, these black schools, by comparison, were just in shambles, and they were like learning in shacks, when the reality is, when you look at these, because I've actually looked at these schools, many of them were just as well kept, if not more so, than some of the white schools in the South. And Manning Johnson, I don't know if you know who he is, but he makes the same exact point in his farewell address. And not only that, when you look at the Jim Crow laws that existed, a lot of these Jim Crow laws throughout the South were agreed upon by both black and white leaders, because they understood that if we are going to be successful as a people, we need to be able to compete, and we need to be able to work in the marketplace alongside people who are of our culture, especially in these tumultuous times. And they were right. They were right about that. We hate to admit that, because it's not exactly PC to say otherwise. And they had, in many instances, deadlines for a lot of these different regulations and pieces of policy, because they were being done at the local level. A lot of these Jim Crow laws were being repealed well before Martin Luther King even came onto the scene. But he gets all the glory, he gets all the praise and credit for having ended Jim Crow in one fell swoop with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which, by the way, was unconstitutional. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was unconstitutional.
Really?
Specifically, Titles II and Title VII. Think about it. I own a business, you own a business. You should have the right to hire and fire whom you please on the basis of whatever merit or demerit that you wish. That should be your right as a business owner. I share the same view. I should be able to serve whom I please and fire whom I please. The question or the problem wasn't so much bigotry as much as it was the fact that in these states, the state government was mandating where blacks can come in and what doors they could come in, whether they can sit in the balcony or what have you at a theater, which car they can sit in on the train. So the state was actually acting unconstitutionally. So Bob Woodson.
I love Bob Woodson.
Yeah, I love him too. But Bob Woodson makes the point that the point should have been about desegregation, not about integration. Because think about what it does to a young black man, as far as the psyche is concerned, to hear your so-called black leaders making much of integration. When your dentist is black, your doctor is black, the teacher at the school is black, everybody you know who's successful in your context is black. But then you turn on television and you see Martin Luther King talking about we need to integrate and we need to do this, we need to do that. What that does to you psychologically is make you think, is a white man's ice colder? Is the grass greener on the other side? Is there something that the white dentist across town can do better than my black dentist who lives in my neighborhood? So you begin to believe that you live in such an abysmal state, and if only we can get what the white folks have, we'll be better. And so it kills that entrepreneurial spirit. A lot of these young folks who were intrigued by SNCC, which was the youth version of Martin Luther King's Southern Christian Leadership Conference, a lot of these young folks abandon the journey and the trajectory laid forth by their fathers and grandfathers. While their fathers and grandfathers were entrepreneurs who had bus lines, who had stores, who had dentist offices and doctor's offices, rather than going the way of their fathers and grandfathers, they chose to become militants. They chose to let their hand off the proverbial plow and instead pick up the picket sign, because they thought that that picket sign will get them the success they so craved. And then it's interesting that you go from 3 out of 4 black children being raised in a home with 2 parents prior to the 1960s to now 70+% of black children are growing up in single parent households. And so all this has to do, from my research, all this has to do with the rhetorical shift that happened in the 1960s at the behest of the civil rights leaders who were making us believe as black folks that white ice is colder.
That's crazy, bro, because I look at it and I think it through. Nobody can deny what you're saying. Nobody can deny that something happened in the 60s with the Civil Rights Movement and Civil Rights Act. Something happened. How do we go from accelerating at a pace greater than white people to decelerating
Right.
at a pace greater than any other race. I don't think any other race is at the point that black people are. I mean, look at the most degenerate music perpetuated by black women and black men. Look at the most degenerate acts. You look at the smash and grabs,
Right.
the murder rate, gangs, gang violence, gun violence. I mean, if you eliminate the gun violence of black on black violence, I mean, it will be 50% of the murders will be solved. Now, it's impossible because if you have people, they're going to kill each other, right? I mean, I wish that it wasn't like that. So it's not just somewhat of a black exclusive thing, but it's more perpetuated, or it's perpetuated at a greater level in the black community.
Right.
Abortions, education, like complaining. This is one thing that I see that it kills me. Jewish people, he passed me a light. Jewish people have consolidated resources, and people get mad at them. The Jews do that. Black people should have did that. Asian people, black people should have did that.
Right.
We had our opportunity.
Yeah.
I say this on the radio, and people get crazy with me, and I get it because it's shocking to hear, but I don't think that we should have integrated at the time that we did. I felt like it should have been more of a natural approach where organically you develop enough value, or even our athletes. Look, brother, if all our athletes just play basketball in black leagues, the black leagues will be so much greater than the white-only leagues that people will be forced to make a decision when dudes are dunking and doing flips and doing all this stuff, and 6'3" dudes running like they 5'10".
It's funner to watch.
It's way more entertaining. Track and field.
Right.
You like, man, these people are, it's like women's sports versus male sports to a certain degree. So, I mean, go ahead.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, what you bring up about the Jews and the Asians and other quote unquote minority groups, you're absolutely right. The fact is, when you look at black art in particular, dating as far back as the Harlem Renaissance, a lot of these black artists and intellectuals and authors were having their content bankrolled by a bunch of white and Jewish liberals. And not only were they being bankrolled by these liberals and leftists and Marxists, the substance of their content was being puppeteered by these leftists and liberals. And so they controlled the messaging of what it was that they were being said, what it was that was being said. And the incentive for the black artists to play along was that they wanted to be famous. They wanted to be superstars. I liken it to whenever Jesus was in the wilderness and Satan appeared to him and tried to get him to defy God. Jesus had to remember who he was.
Right.
And basically reject Satan, even when Satan took him to the top of a very high hill, a mountain, and showed him the entire world and said, all this will be yours if you would kneel down and worship me. And Satan has continued to work in the same way throughout humanity, and he continues to do so when it comes to celebrities. A lot of celebrities sell out because they want to be famous, and they want to see their name in lights. Unfortunately. And so this is what was happening during the Harlem Renaissance. And so what is the messaging that these black artists are putting out there for the world to see? It's twofold. The messaging does something different for the black person who sees it than it does for the white person who sees it. To the extent that a black person sees it, they begin to internalize and identify with that messaging. And what is the substance of that messaging? Well, the substance of that messaging is we are downtrodden, we are oppressed, we're being put upon, we are a foreigner in a strange land. This is the messaging that's being echoed time and again. You see it in the blues, you see it over and over and over again. The messaging to the white folks is that, well, these black folks aren't happy here, they don't want to be here, we should be afraid of them, this, that, and the third. And so this is what's happening with as far as the art is concerned. And so whenever you allow that kind of messaging to go to your head as a black person, you begin to lose interest in being an entrepreneur.
Right.
You begin to lose interest in organizing your sports leagues to compete in all the others. there was so much focus put uh, into black culture when you look at activism, when you look at literature, when you look at all these different things, and not as much focus being put into the Asians, into the Jews, and to others, to where they were able to survive on their own merits, and in so doing build the character that's needed to maintain and to build upon the success that they were seeing. Whereas because there's so much, it's like when you're over coddled, when you're over massaged, and there's so much attention being paid to you, it begins to take away that incentive to do it for yourself, to where you become a ward of the state.
Yeah.
And so that's why you see blacks, Jews, Asians, and others ascending at the same rate. And then the more focus and attention that's being paid on blacks, and we need to give them this and we need to give them that, they begin to decline while these other groups begin to traject upward, because why do for myself when the system's going to do it for me, under the behest of the Marxist movements and the social justice movements and Martin Luther King and others. I'm hoping that makes sense.
Yeah, no,
I know I said a lot.
No, 100%. And I think that this, when we were talking about in the car on the way over here, you know, when I think about the power of the mind, the power of positive thinking, putting yourself, like for instance, I tell people this every time I go somewhere, because it's a hard pitch, because Christians and others have been told that it's goo goo gaga to focus your mind on things that you want to come to fruition. Everything that you see that was ever made started in somebody's mind.
Right.
The technology of cell phones is incredible. You think back in the day when Jesus was them walking around and they got to send messengers to do stuff, you think they ever thought that you could get on a phone and talk to somebody across the whole world? Right. That started in somebody's mind. Right. So the power of the mind, the focus, and the visualization of something that does not exist is something that I believe is a gift from God. And I say the same thing, not only when it comes to innovation in that way, but what you think about yourself, you will become. The Bible says this very clearly.
Right.
You know, the power of life and death is in your tongue.
Right.
Well, your tongue don't move without your brain coordinating the tongue movement. So whatever you're thinking about is what you're going to say. That's who you are in your heart, and that will come to fruition. And so when you're listening to "I'm a victim," we got to work twice as hard as the white man, your vision of prosperity, success, and greatness is diminished subconsciously.
Right.
From when you were a child. I can't remember somebody telling me specifically, you know, like in a consistent way that the white man is out to get you. Right. My mama and them just told me that. This is something that's been brainwashed into me subconsciously, with a little bit from music, a little bit from TV, a little bit from what grandma said, a little bit from some watching on TV.
Get it from everywhere.
And subconsciously, I now don't know the source of it, but I internalize as an adult that the white man has to dislike me, or that I never was supposed to be here, or my people was stolen from this beautiful country, like Wakanda, right? We were in this beautiful country living in harmony, and we had all the technology, and diseases were cured, and the white man came and ripped us. No, it wasn't like that. You were getting genocided and scalped and enslaved by your own people. And then those people begin to sell us to others for profit.
And had you not been the loser in the war, it would have been you who sold them into slavery.
Come on.
No, you're absolutely right. And the A.W. Tozer, the late theologian, said what comes into your mind when you think about God is the most important thing about you. And I agree with that. But what I would add to that is also one of the most important things about you is the stories that you tell yourself. To your point, if you're getting this inundative message, this very pervasive message everywhere you turn, that you are had upon, that you're being put upon, that you're downtrodden or whatever, it does create this image in your head that you are a nobody, that you'll never accomplish anything. And when you hear some politician on television telling you that, hey, I want to pass this bill and pass that bill and pass this legislation to help black folks or whatever, that politician becomes all the more intriguing to you because you are ripe for that type of demagoguery and propaganda. It doesn't work with a victor.
Right.
Again, like I said with the black folks in the South who weren't really feeling or picking up what the NAACP was putting down. They believe themselves to be victor. They believe that they can accomplish anything because of the kind of rhetoric, the kind of stories that we heard from the likes of Booker T. Washington and George Washington Carver and others. And so because these were the stories that we were telling ourselves, you couldn't tell us nothing.
Right.
We could accomplish anything.
From slavery, my man.
Right.
People were slaves.
Right.
Out from slavery, the level of acceleration of success was enormous.
Mm-hmm.
I always think of Madam C.J. Walker.
Right. Yeah.
I always think of Sarah Bree Love as a government name.
Mm-hmm.
I always think about this, man. How in the world, if black people are so, because we have to assume, based on the rhetoric that is exposed to us today, that we had to have been worse than we are today.
Yeah.
We had to have been worse than we were in the 60s, which caused the revolt, the Civil Rights Act.
Right.
So we had to be much worse. Times had to be tougher. Blacks had to have no rights. But then you see Madam C.J. Walker making hundreds of millions of dollars. She would have been, adjusted for inflation and other economic things, she would have been a billionaire. She would have been Oprah Winfrey.
Right.
In the early 1900s.
The early 1900s.
The Tuskegee Institute, Booker T. Washington.
Mm-hmm.
How are these people so successful if black people were worse then than they were in the 60s? I really enjoyed that interview. And if you want to see the rest of the interview, you have to go to TatumPlus.com. That's TatumPlus.com. It's probably the cheapest subscription service you're going to find. Go on and see the rest of it. And we got a whole bunch more. We have mine and my wife's relationship podcast that we do there. We have some exclusive content, behind the scenes, speeches that I do. All of the above will be on Tatum Plus. And we plan to expand Tatum Plus. Plan to have more influencers there and also movies and all of the above. We're going to do it all on Tatum Plus. So get in where you fit in while it's still inexpensive. TatumPlus.com.